Branch Chief, ILO, Geneva. We have our discussant, Mr. Mahtabuddin, Assistant Professor, Department of Economics, University of Dhaka, and PhD candidate, University of Manchester, UK. He's connected with us through Zoom. We have our presenters. We have 2 online presenters and 2 in-person presenters. Our in-person presenters are Ms. Simran Khosla and Mr. Osman Goni Tuhin. I would like to request them to take their seat on the podium. And our online participants are Dr. Sugandha Huria and Dr. Amjad Masood. They are connected with us through Zoom. So I am handing over the charge of this session to our Honorable Chair, Dr. Ayanatul Islam. Sir.
Assalamu alaikum. If I could kindly have your attention, please. We're about to start the session. আমি আপনাদের সকলের অনুমতি নিয়ে ইংরেজিতে কন্ডাক্ট করব সেশনটা। এই জন্য যে আমাদের যে প্রেজেন্টাররা আছেন ওনাদেরকে বাংলাদেশি হিসেবে বাংলা জানে ধরে নেওয়া সম্ভব না। তো সুতরাং আমি for their benefit and of course in their honor, this is going to be conducted in English. Okay? I've been introduced very generously by Shah. Thank you so much. There are the theme of this particular breakout session is trade, connectivity, and regional integration. These are very important topics. As we all know, the prosperity of Bangladesh itself depends heavily on its ability to remain engaged with the region and with the rest of the world to trade and other links. So this is therefore a very important topic and very relevant from the perspective of Bangladesh as well. There are 4 fascinating papers, at least from the title I can see that. The first one talks about navigating access barriers in agriculture, food insecurity and so on and so forth. The second one is on the welfare effects of a free trade agreement and whether those welfare effects are affected by investment provisions or their absence. The third paper is actually about language. Does Mandarin facilitate international trade and bilateral trade in particular? And finally, there is a focus on MFN clauses, which is going to be presented from a legal perspective. So we have 2, as stated, we have 2 presenters online and 2 offline. I'd now like to ask our first presenter, Ms. Simran Khosla. Is she here?
Yes, sir.
Oh, there you are. Simran to present first, and then we'll move on. Thank you. It's all yours.
Thank you, sir. Will you go down by the down key, right?
This key.
Which one?
This key.
Okay.
The right arrow key.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. The title of our paper is Beyond Borders, Navigating the Terrain of Market Access Barriers in the Agriculture Sector Amidst Rising Food Insecurity, where the objective of the paper is to quantify the impact of regulatory trade barriers like non-tariff measures on agriculture products and to address their role in rising food insecurity. To set the play, we are all aware that volatility in food prices, geopolitical tensions, and climate shocks are some of the factors which have impeded access to food for many. And I would like to draw your attention to another important factor, that is trade policy actions, which can potentially destabilize food markets. These trade policy instruments are primarily of 2 types, tariff and non-tariff measures. While multilateral negotiations have led to the liberalization of ad valorem tariffs, we are yet to see any conclusive outcome on non-tariff measures. Non-tariff measures are measures other than tariffs that can quantify, that can influence the quantities traded and also influence prices. these non-tariff measures like SPS and TBT are being introduced with the objective of protecting consumer, to protect animal and plant health. However, some view them as protectionist in nature and also as discriminatory in impact, since exporters from non-developed economies tend to face a lot of struggle to overcome these measures. Hence, these are one of the contentious issues at present, and we are interested to dwell deeper into this matter. As far as the existing literature is concerned, there is a rich and growing body which has looked at the impact of non-tariff measures on exports, and we find that the results are mixed, wherein majority of studies have found that these measures are trade distorting and are very stringent in nature, as shown by the top 7 studies. However, there are few studies which have found these to be trade catalyst, wherein exports from non-developed economies have grown over the years, as shown by the last 2 studies in the slide. However, we found that there are certain gaps in the literature that we try to overcome with our study, wherein firstly, if you look, all of these studies have focused on specific exporters and importers. For example, studies which are trying to look at the impact of measures from developed economies, they have only focused on countries like European Union and US. So we tend to go beyond the coverage that these studies take, and we try to take several exporters and importers into our account. Secondly, while these studies mention that they're trying to look at the impact of non-tariff measures like SPS and TBT, they in fact are looking at the impact of subset of measures. Like for example, they're looking at standards or tolerance limits. So once again, we try to look at SPS and TBT in their entirety. There are a few more unique aspects, however, they are methodological in nature, and I'll try to talk about them in the next few slides. As far as the methodology was concerned, the first step was to select exporters, and we've used the World Bank's latest income categorization to select 10 low middle income countries which are listed in table 1. The second step entailed shortlisting of importers, and once again we use the World Bank's income categorization to select 10 high-income countries that are listed in table 2. Many of them are members of European Union. However, we also have countries that are beyond the European Union like Japan, South Korea, to name a few. The third step was selection of products, where we used 2 filters. The first filter was to use the WTO's Agreement of Agriculture to identify these products, post which we selected the top 20 most traded products among these country pairs. And these products are listed in table 3. They are at HS 4-digit level. Before I move to the empirical model, we went a little bit into the data, and we find that for these specific products, both ad valorem and non-ad valorem tariffs tend to remain high over the period of analysis, and they've only marginally declined over the years. Hence, developed economies are still using tariffs as a measure to protect their markets. We also saw that at the same time, non-tariff measures have been on an incline, and especially since 2008. 2008 marked the period where there was a breakdown in multilateral negotiations, and it's called the Doha round, and we saw that non-tariff measures rose rapidly. And in figure 2, we tend to go into the intricacies of non-tariff measures, and we find that approximately 23,000 non-tariff measures have been introduced over the 22 period that we've looked into. And majority of these measures was SPS measures, and there were also TBT measures, and there were approximately 5,000 TBT measures. What was interesting to see was that while there has been proliferate usage of non-tariff measures, exports from low middle income countries tend to remain robust. As you can see, from 2000 to 21, they have increased, and what the key point was that post 2008, while NTMs were growing, the exports grew at a much faster rate. So we found that very interesting to see. This is an empirical model where we've used an augmented gravity model with our dependent variable to be log of exports from low middle income countries to high income countries. The main independent variables of interest were non-tariff measures like SPS and TBT. I like to point out that when these measures are notified to the WTO, EU as a group tends to notify these measures. However, countries which are part of EU can also notify these measures. And we find that a lot of studies don't take the individual countries' notifications into account while they're doing analysis. And this is the unique aspect where we've taken both if that country was a part of EU, we've taken the individual notification and we've also taken EU's notification into account. And this data comes from the Center for WTO's studies database. The other independent variable of interest was tariffs, where we've included both ad valorem and non-ad valorem tariffs. Again, a lot of studies don't take into account non-ad valorem tariffs into their analysis.
Simran, if I may, you might wish to wrap up.
Yes, sir.
There are other presenters.
Yes, sir. I'll do that. Other variables of interest were gravity variables, and we've included importer, exporter, and time fixed effects. And the period of analysis was from 2000 to 2021. We've conducted a series of specification, as you can see. However, our preferred model was the feasible generalized least square model due to the uncertainty about the nature of heteroscedasticity and also because of the concerns of autocorrelation. And we find that the model yields significant results. As for the variables that were of interest to us, we find that measures like TBT tended to increase exports by approximately 3%, whereas SPS notifications led to a decline in exports. There are several reasons for this polar opposite result, but I like to highlight a few, where we've also seen support from the literature. For measures like TBT, in our analysis, we've looked at the frequency of notification or the frequency of these measures. We are not actually looking at the stringency of these measures. So it is a possibility that measures like TBT are not stringent in nature and exporters are able to comply with them. On the other hand, SPS measures, there's a general consensus that these measures are more stringent and trade distorting, because of which we could see a negative impact on exports. And additionally, in our analysis, the majority of non-tariff measures were SPS, because of which we could see this negative sign. We did a robustness check wherein we omitted
I'll request you to just conclude in one statement.
Sure.
What is the significance?
So the findings of our analysis indicate that non-tariff measures are complex. They have multi-dimensional impact depending upon the kind of products and countries that we take into account. There is a possibility that certain non-tariff measures do not impede or do not destabilize food market. However, there are certain measures like SPS which have the potential to destabilize the food market, and I think multilateral effort needs to go in to help exporters overcome these measures. So I think that's the conclusion. And we had a few policy recommendations, but I think that we can skip for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I apologize for those interventions, just had to be fair to all the others. Yeah. So just to make sure that we know more about the author. The author is based in a think tank, the Ministry of Commerce, Government of India. And this is a co-authored paper, and her co-authors are Mr. Amit Kundu and Mrs. Akanksha Sharma. Okay. So thank you again very much for the very lucid presentation and for responding so politely to my interventions. Okay. Now, our next presentation is going to be an online one, is it? Is it Shukanda? Okay. So is where she pops up here on the screen? Yeah. Okay. Excuse me. আপনারা যারা অডিয়েন্সে আছেন, you should be able to respect the speakers. আপনারা যদি একটু ভয়েসটা নিচে রাখেন বা যদি ডিসকাশন করতে চান নিজেদের মধ্যে, কাইন্ডলি রুমের বাইরে গিয়ে করবেন, because it really does seem to affect the presentation and the decorum of the presentation. So I request that you do try to follow that. Thank you. তো উনি কি আছে জুমে? আচ্ছা, why don't we ask Shugandha then? There she is, yeah.
All right. And those who are present there, I just needed a confirmation from them.
Hello. Shugandha, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can very clearly. Thank you so much. So you are
Okay.
going to make the presentation online. We have the audience interested in listening to what you have to say. And yours is on the welfare effects of a free trade agreement, depending upon the nature of investment provisions. Okay. And Shugandha Horula is an assistant professor at IIFT, New Delhi. And please, the floor is yours. 10 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for giving me this platform to share the findings of my study, which is theoretical assessment. Since the time is very short, I'll quickly take you through the objectives, the background, and hence the findings that we have got. So essentially, these are the three objectives that we are trying to address with the help of this study. The first objective is we want to figure out whether when countries incorporate investment provisions, more specifically substantive investment provisions within free trade agreements, does that affect the gains from such engagements? That's the first question. The second question is, therefore, do FTAs with investment provisions encourage more trade and FDI within the member economies without actually affecting their trade and FDI related, policies with the rest of the world? And therefore, what is the impact on external trade policy, so to say, when you incorporate those investment provisions within free trade agreements? And the third is that we would also like to touch upon the distributional aspects of such FTAs with investment provisions vis-a-vis the distributional aspects of FTAs without investment provisions. And when I'm talking about the distributional aspect, I'm basically touching upon the debate that talks about unequal gains from regional trade agreements that was pretty much highlighted during the last decade between 2010 to 2020. Now, if I come back to the background that, what actually made us do this study, there are 3 points that I would like to highlight. The first point is that post 2008, as Simran also pointed out, the entire global trade plummeted. And at that time, countries started questioning the very notion of free trade, more specifically freer trade altogether. And what we have seen is that in the last decade, even the number of RTAs fell drastically. So that was one. The second is that, of course, in the context of India, the results were not very different. After 2010, we did not sign any RTA. Before 2020, at least, when we started renegotiating our pacts with UAE, Mauritius, etc. That means that it was not different from India, and it was true for the other countries in the developed world as well, like US, many countries of the European Union, etc. The third is that, even during the COVID crisis, we saw that suddenly there was this renewed push towards free trade agreements. And despite all crisis-related situations between 2020 and 2022, as many as 47 new RTAs were signed. And these were not just specific to countries from the north. In fact, a lot of developing and developed countries now started signing RTAs. And these are no longer traditional RTAs, so to say, which only incorporate, provisions related to tariffs per se, but these are now more deepened in the sense that they incorporate both WTO plus and WTO X provisions, of which investments play a very critical role. Now, why am I specifically touching upon investments? Because today, if you look at the nature of trade altogether, one of the recent statistics that have been shared by OECD's, activities of multinational enterprises database, it suggests that more than 70% of the world trade in goods and services, it is happening through foreign direct investment, and more than 50% of the world imports of goods and services is happening through foreign direct investment. That means today most of the trade is actually intra-firm trade, and these firms are nothing but subsidiaries of similar multinational companies. So this means what? That we cannot really disentangle trade from that of FDI, and it is no longer just the usual import-export kind of trade, which is now dominating the world trade scenario. And in fact, this link between trade and FDI is pretty much well established in the literature. But the problem is when you deep dive into the literature on free trade agreements today, there we do not see, there we do not see many studies that specifically talk about the welfare effects of FTAs with investment provisions vis-a-vis those without investment provisions, because most of the literature either talks about welfare effects of free trade agreements and how that welfare effects gets distributed among different partner economies without touching upon the role of FDI, or the other stream of literature talks about how do, when countries negotiate FTAs among each other, how does that attract FDI from non-FTA nations, into those partner economies altogether. So this is what has motivated us to work on this topic. Now, if I move to the stylized framework, so we have not delved into an empirical study. It's a pure theoretical study using components from both trade theory and industrial organization theory. So this represents the stylized framework of our, study, where we have assumed that there is this world market, and in this world market there are three countries. Country A, which is assumed to home the multinational firm, and countries B and R. So specifically, in order to simplify the structure, we assume that country A is one country from the developed world, which is the carrier of foreign direct investment, where the parent of the multinational company lies, and countries B and R belong to the developing markets altogether. In each of the three countries, there are two production sectors. One sector that produces an
about 5
intermediate.
minutes.
Yeah.
About 5 minutes, yeah? Just to keep track of the time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so I will just tell you the basics. So in this world market, in each of the three, and in each of the three countries, there are two sectors. One is the upstream sector, which produces an intermediate input, and this upstream sector then supplies its intermediate input to the local downstream firm, and as well as to the downstream firm in the other country. So that means this is a usual GVC kind of trade, but what we have incorporated is a very simple form of GVCs, because we have just assumed one intermediate input and one final good. And of course, the usual trade cost scenario remains. So you have tariff imposed on intermediate inputs imports, and you have separate tariff imposed on final goods imports as well. But if a particular firm, that is the multinational firm from country A, decides to offer FDI in country B, then in that case, it also has to incur a cost over and above, the usual trade cost. Why? Because now it is going to set up a production plant in that country, and there are operational costs of that FDI, which usually comes as the form of regulatory restrictions on FDI, which are being imposed by the host country under consideration. And we also assume that, as far as the demand side is concerned, the tastes are homothetic for all the three countries, but the market sizes differ. So in order to simplify our structure, we assume that B and R, because they belong to the same world, they are of similar sizes, but A has a different size altogether. So we introduce market size asymmetry between the parent and the host country for the FDI. And we also assume that our country R has specifically prohibited FDI, so that we can compare that what is the difference between the welfare effects of FTA between within countries B and R altogether. So then we take three different cases. In the first case, we talk about the upstream firm, which is now a multinational firm in country A, and this upstream firm decides to offer FDI in country B. That's our case one. In cases 2 and 3, we assume that the multinational player belongs to the downstream market. So that means the multinational firm is a final good producer in this case, and the same firm now decides to offer FDI in country B. And in the third case, what we do, we still assume that the multinational is a downstream player, but this time we introduce another possibility, which states that, the upstream firm in the developing market, it has access to cheaper inputs. So will that attract more and more of FDI from the downstream firm from the developed market into the developing market? That's another question that we are going to address. Now, for each of these three cases, there are 4 trade regimes, because we had to ultimately take a step-by-step approach to, find out the specific case with reference to FTAs with investment provisions. So in regime 1, we assume that this is trade with optimal input and output tariff. So that means this is a usual trade happening between the countries. The government decides about the optimal input and output tariffs, and all the three countries are trading in both the commodities under consideration. Then in regime 2, we assume that now country A country A's multinational firm opts for FDI into country B. And if it is case 1, that means it is going to be the FDI at the intermediate input
Yeah.
stage.
Excuse
So
me.
then what we do, we find out.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
just about a minute to wrap up, please, so that we give space to the other two speakers. Thank you. About a minute,
Sorry.
please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so I will quickly move on to the
Yeah,
results.
just the findings,
So
yeah.
there are two. Yes, yes. So there are two parts to the result. The first part is where we talk about the welfare effects of FDI, because ultimately, if you want to incorporate substantive FDI liberalization provisions into free trade agreements, we should also understand that what's going to be the impact of, incorporating such provisions within these FTAs altogether. So as far as FDI, the effects of FDI is concerned, I here compare the results across the two cases with reference to upstream FDI firm and the downstream FDI firm. So as far as the multinational upstream FDI firm is concerned, we found that if the country A's multinational upstream firm opts for FDI in country B, then in that case, this does not just benefit the host countries, that is country B's downstream firm and consumers, but in fact, country A also gets benefited. And one of the most important results was that the moment you introduce some sort of FDI going from A to B, we realize that even the optimal input tariffs change in all the countries under consideration, specifically in the host country, that incentivizes the government of the economy to reduce both its optimal input and output tariff, which means that even when you know that it is very difficult to negotiate bilateral trade agreements, even these FDIs could help you in going for unilateral trade liberalization procedures altogether. So this in a way indicates the trade FDI complementarity that gets established within our framework, even though we are purely talking about horizontal FDI. And when we talk about this trade FDI complementarity between the host and the parent, the source country of FDI, this does not happen at the expense of their trade with the rest of the world. In fact, FDI between A and B also increase trade possibilities with the rest of the world. So that means no trade diversion is feasible in this case.
Okay.
And as far as the welfare effects.
Yeah, just one line if you can think of. We're saying what's the most important finding for policy. Just one line, one concluding remark. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so the final conclusion is here. The final conclusion states that, FTAs with investment provisions are more welfare enhancing vis-a-vis FTAs without investment provisions. And this is a very important conclusion, specifically in the context of many developing countries, including India today, because now we are trying to negotiate our agreements with countries who are also important FDI partners altogether. So that means if we are not going to negotiate substantive investment provisions, that may lead to lower welfare effects from such investments. And the second part of the policy conclusion suggests that even though there has been a lot of talks about unequal gains from free trade agreements altogether in the recent past, however, our framework suggests that the gains as well as distribution of gains from free trade agreements, these not only depend upon whether or not you're going to sign an FTA with the other partner country, that also depends on the sector in which the multinational activity is happening in your country or the nature of the trade. Sorry.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, we can come back to it during Q&A as possible.
Okay, sure.
I would like to request the audience to show our appreciation to this presentation. Thank you. Thank you. Do stay online, please, because we'll go on to the next presenter.
Yeah.
This one is our presenter. Is it from Pakistan? Yeah. No. Also online. Yeah. And it's Amjad Masood, Senior Assistant Professor, Bahariya University, Pakistan. It's an online presentation focusing on the role of Mandarin in encouraging bilateral trade. Okay, please.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I just share my screen.
Dr. Masood, like all the other presenters, if I may just say, as the chair, you have 10 minutes. So if you would be kind enough to make the presentation within that framework. Okay, thank you.
Sure, I would finish, I think, well within time. All right. So as you see, the title, From Tongues to Trade, how the surge of Mandarin can influence bilateral trade. The background is, I think we are not going to spend a lot of time on describing that China is growing. Of course, it's growing.
Sorry to bother you. Is there any way you can make it full
fact.
screen? Sorry, full screen. Excuse me, your presentation. Can you make it full screen? Go to slideshow, I guess. No? Slideshow the Jethal with it.
Yeah.
If you could make it there, fantastic. Thank you. Lovely.
It's all right now?
Yeah, it's clear. It's
All right.
very good.
So,
thanks.
Thank you. So not only in terms of economic growth, but also in terms of trade, China is, of course, the mega trader. But what is interesting here, with all this increasing engagement of China with the rest of the world in context BRI or otherwise, Chinese language is also growing. So there have been literature citing growth in along different avenues in terms of diplomatic relations, in terms of economic relations. In fact, some of the studies kind of predicted Chinese as a new language, new English a few years ago. I don't know if it's going to happen like that, but what we can agree is the growth of Chinese language is kind of very visible. So with that background, I actually want to analyze how that would affect the bilateral trade, particularly of the BRI countries, and how that would affect on the third countries. Here's the chart which shows the number of Chinese speakers across the globe from ethnologue data. Is simply, as we kind of understand, that they are spread across almost all the countries. So then we also have evidence from the literature that language similarity between countries has to do something on the economic policy. Here we particularly talk about the trade. So in context of gravity modeling or in context of any other kind of studies, there are evidence that similarity between trading partner affect their bilateral trade. So this is kind of a background we have. Now, in this particular study, what I do is all right. So this is a simple standard gravity model. I think two people already presented that, so most of the audience understand all these things. We try to kind of explain bilateral trade on the basis of the export supply of the exporter and all the factors which affect export supply, and also the other factors which are affecting import demand of the importing country, and in technical terms, what we say that multilateral resistance of the exporter and importer and so on. And based on the same, here's the kind of empirical model for the baseline. Here we have bilateral export as the dependent variable, which is in levels, not in log form. And we have other factors such as bilateral distance, contiguity, colony, RTA, and so on. What is something kind of, I should state that here, this intel is a dummy variable which differentiate between domestic trade and international trade. This is kind of a latest development in gravity model that kind of estimate the gravity model in more robust terms, which should include intra-trade in addition to the international trade. This is kind of discussed very much by Yotov and others. So using this kind of framework, I calculate the baseline scenario, and then I run the simulation. I could do the simulation in this model only because of this development, which is kind of language commonality index developed by people at International Trade Center at US. Traditionally, there has been, language has been kind of considered as a dummy variable, 0, 1, but based on this indicator, now we have a continuous measurement of language that is the number of speaker in exporting country and the number of importer, number of speakers in the importing countries based on that.
So about 5 minutes, please.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
I will finish in 3 minutes, I guess. So in terms of number of speakers in both trading partners, and actually this index is, I think, sophisticated enough because they are not considering only the number of speakers, but they are also considering the similarity between languages. For example, Urdu or Bangla or Hindi, they are more similar than Chinese and Urdu or German and Chinese and so on. So along the language tree in terms of linguistics, so they have this one parameters and the other parameters is number of speakers in both countries. On the base of these two main kind of components, they build this kind of index, common language index. So I use this index, and okay, this is the statistics we have. I mean, it's the trade and common language dummy, the traditional one where we measure language in 0-1 way, and common language index and distance and all these things. So this is the baseline kind of estimates. Here it shows that when we are measuring language in terms of binary variable, in both ways, we see a positive impact of language similarity on bilateral trade. But this is a very common kind of finding of all gravity models. So this is the baseline. And with that, what I change is, hypothetically, I change, for example, 20% increase in the number of Chinese speaker in the sample countries. And with that, I kind of recalculated the common language index. Obviously, when there are more people speaking Chinese in Bangladesh or in Thailand, the value of the index would increase, and that would kind of tell about the increase or any change in the bilateral trade. So with this simulation of 20% point increase in the length in the Chinese speakers in the sample countries, here is the outcome. So on the very first column, we see the exporters, which are in the sample, and I just see impact on a kind of 3 countries or region. One is China, and from the importing side, and the other one is Japan. And in the third column, I kind of lumped the 5 major countries from EU. So as we see from this estimation, this is in the percent change in the bilateral trade. So with this increased level of language similarity between China and these exporters, so the bilateral trade between China and them is increasing. And on the other hand, there is some trade diversion from European Union or from other countries like Japan. So this is kind of a finding. All right, so in the next slide, we have the rest of the countries. But what we can conclude from here, okay, this is kind of a dramatic estimation. I know that there would be some flaws. For example, the number of Arabic speakers are also increasing just because of their birth rate, or Hindi speaker or Urdu speaker, or there would be more people speaking English. But just to kind of have a general understanding of how the spread of Chinese would affect. And here I can say that the impact of increase in language similarity between countries is kind of affecting the bilateral trade. But the effect of the language is not only for trade, it can be for foreign direct investment, for tourism, for any type of economic or non-economic relationships between countries. So the effect of
okay, Dr. Masood, if you could just wrap up, and
thank you very much.
Yeah. Oh, lovely. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm done.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah. Thank you.
There will be, for the benefit of our presenters, there will be a discussant after the last presentation. And I'd like to invite, now we switch from economists to lawyers. So our last presentation, but certainly not the least, is by Mr. Usman Ghani, who is an advocate in the Supreme Court of Bangladesh. And you have an co-author here, also another Osman. So the floor is yours.
Honorable Chair, distinguished audience, good afternoon. If I'm not wrong, I'm the only presenter here is not an economist. I'm a lawyer and working with the International Trade Council closely, and we are actually working with FDI and other relation. So let's dive into our presentation. Our topic is reflection of MFN clauses through bilateral commitments in world politics, a comparative analysis on trade balance of small countries among the WTO member states in South Asia. So what is most favorite nation? Most favorite nation is the most vital clause of the WTO's different agreements like GATS and TRIPS agreements. So the most favorite nations are actually given privileges to actually compete the globalization market in the in this trade, international trade. The globalization of trade and the establishment of international organizations such as the WTO have significantly influenced the economic interactions among nations. MFN clauses, a fundamental principle of the WTO, play a vital role in shaping trade relationship by ensuring non-discriminatory treatments among member states. The World Trade Organization serves as the cornerstone of international trade, fostering cooperation and regulating economic interaction among the member states. The application of most favored nation clauses, a fundamental principle of the WTO, plays a vital role in shaping the landscape of global trade relation. So, what is the principle of the WTO? Trade without discrimination, where most two focus theme is most favored nation or MFN clauses, and second is national treatment, treating foreigners and the local equally, and other is the gradually liberalization of trade through periodical negotiation. Objective of our study is to analyze the implication of the most favored nation clauses in bilateral commitments among WTO members in South Asia, to assess the impact of MFN clauses on the trade balances of small countries in the region, to compare and contrast the trade dynamics of small countries within the South Asian WTO framework, and the most higher income countries of the WTO have to be focused on the export and import delivery of trade balancing among the middle and small income countries. In this way, the WTO member state not only follows the bilateral or multilateral commitment, but also has to preserve the three significant policies such as trade enhancement, reducing trade diversion, and trade balance of small countries among the WTO member state of international trade, and also defend the world political families. This review of this literature summary, the body of information about the reflection of MFN clauses in bilateral commitments within the framework of South Asia's small country trade balance, the comprehensive knowledge of the influence of MFN principle on global politics and the dynamic of international commerce in facilitated by the reviews, examination of historical developments, legal framework, comparative trade assessment, and the possibilities of problems and encountered by the small countries. So here are our key points. We reflected on MFN clauses, bilateral commitments, world politics, trade balance of small countries, WTO member state of South Asia. Review about the concept was UN guidelines, national laws, and international laws, and reflect of clauses was the principle, convention, and case studies. Our research methodology was actually a combined of qualitative and quantitative. So what are the pros and cons of the most favorite nations? The pros, if I say first in pros, access to the large market, lower cost of export, products become more competitive, and more opportunities for growth. And cons was no protection against the cheaper good produced by the foreign countries, and local agricultural industry still cannot compete with subsidies US and EU markets. So we have reviewed the trade agreements like the WTO's agreements, GATT, General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, WTO Agreement on Trade-Related Aspect of Intellectual Property Rights, which is simply known as TRIPS, WTO Agreement on Trade in Service, GATS, and WTO Agreements on Agriculture, and bilateral and regional trade agreements like South Asian Free Trade Areas, SAFTA, and preferential trade agreements, and other national trade laws and policies. And what are and also we have taken the dispute settlement mechanism in our study. So the GATS is actually the origin of MFN. The MFN approach is covered by the GATT, which was the World Trade Organization's founding agreement. The idea of non-discrimination, which mandates that every WTO member provides all other members with the same favorable treatment, in emphasizing in Article 1 of the GATT. The GATT effects on the trade balance of the South Asian countries among WTO members since its founding in 1947. In this field of international trade, South Asia, which is home of diverse collection of nations, has been both possibles and obstacles. The influence of the GATT on the trade balance of tiny WTO members was founded in 1964, has worked to provide developing nations export preference treatment. The analysis may benefit from knowing how MFN clauses affect the protection of intellectual property rights, as TRIPS contains provision participants in intellectual property protection. GATS govern international trade in service and examine the impact of MFN clauses on services. Trading among the small countries in South Asia is crucial. Analyzing the impact of the WTO agreement in trade in service with most favorable national clauses on the trade balance of small countries in South Asia. A WTO agreement on agriculture, the trade balance of agricultural products among the WTO members nations are impacted by this agreement, which deals with concerns pretending the market access, trade, and subsidies. So regional agreements, the regional trade agreements actually between two or more countries to promote and to actually promote the trade and economical relation between those countries so that they can actually develop their political relation. Like SAFTA, South Asian Free Trade Area. SAFTA is a regional trade agreement that aims to lower trade barriers between South Asian nations. Trade balance and bilateral commitment between South Asian WTO members may be impacted by the terms of SAFTA and other regional agreements. National trade law and policies were also taken in concern. The rule and regulation that governs trade and specific to each WTO member state. It is crucial to appreciate the national legal framework in order to understand how nations apply to incorporate MFN clauses into the bilateral agreements.
Your 1 minute, Mr. Yep. Yep.
So the dispute settlement mechanism, WTO dispute settlement understanding, DSU, in case of dispute related to trade, and the DSU outlines the procedure for settling conflicts among the WTO member state. Revocation of MFN status. This is actually the main problem of MFN clauses. Like we have seen that the Pakistan was actually revoked from MFN by the India. Even in 2013, the G7 countries also, 7 countries also revoked the MFN clauses of Russia. Even we have seen in recently before our election that USA and other EU countries also actually threaten us to revoke our MFN status. So I will not go over all those datas and charts because of the time shortened. Just to
if you could kindly wrap up.
Just concluding with my policy recommendation, we have recommended with enhanced diplomatic engagement, tailored trade policies, capacity building and technical assessment, geopolitical risk mitigation, which is really, really important to actually support the MFN clauses, monitoring and evaluation mechanism, regional cooperation and public-private partnership. The PPP project must be actually encouraged to do so. So that's all about our presentation. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. Okay, please. Once again, I'd like to thank all the presenters, but we now move on to the discussant, who I believe, according to our timekeeper, 15 minutes. Is that right? 15 minutes, yeah. So, Mahtab, where are you?
I'm online, sir.
Hello, how are you doing?
Can you hear me?
Okay, excellent.
I'm fine, sir. Thank you.
Okay,
Good to see
you. Please go ahead with the presentation, with the discussion of those 4 papers. You have 15 minutes, please. And the timekeeper will alert the amount of time you have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir, for giving the floor. And thanks to all the presenters for excellent presentation. I'm assuming it shows me audio's network bandwidth is low. So should I turn my video off? Or is it fine? Can you hear me all clearly?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. So let me give you, go on to the comments paper by paper. The first paper by Simran Khosla. By the way, before I begin, I must say all the papers I enjoyed your presentation and the contents you have presented, very timely and important for the session. So regarding the first paper, I had a couple of comments and clarification that I would be interested to see. For example, let me start with this one. So, how did you select your exporter and importer, and why not you select like all the LMIC as exporters, or why not all the HIC as importers? And in the case of products, you selected like top 20 products. Why not all agri products? Like a justification in the paper would be really good. Like why you selected only 10 exporter and only 10 importers, like rather than all the papers, all the commodities and countries. Now, regarding your model, I have a couple of observations. Number one, how do you construct the multivariate resistance index? Like, is it based on a remoteness index? It is not clear in the paper. If it is based on remoteness index, then be aware that the remoteness index is heavily criticized in the current literature. And also, you have used technical barriers to trade, TBT on the right-hand side, SPS on the right-hand side. One reason why we actually do not, in the conventional gravity model, why the TBT and the SPS, they are not used in the right-hand side because of the endogeneity. Like countries put TBT or SPS in place to control the trade flows, or put some barriers. In other words, the trade flow depends on the TBT, SPS, and at the same time, they actually they are set based on the trade flows. So a TBT a country selects might depend on trade flows. That's what I'm saying. So in this case, some papers now actually use two-stage modified gravity model to address this issue. So you may look into that. Now, regarding your sign of the TBT, your sign is positive. Like why the sign of the TBT is positive? Like I assume one explanation could be, since there is a kind of economic scale which gives you this result, like only a selected countries they can meet the TBT and they can export. But again, there could be selection bias there. So products which only meet quality gets imported. And this is why it is very important to incorporate zero trade flows. So my question is, have you included the zero trade flows in the model? If you have not, you should. So also for a gravity model, the R score you have reported, it seems very low. So this might be because you did not include the distance as a variable in the regression model. Like distance, we use in the gravity model as an explanatory variable to incorporate the, to incorporate the iceberg trade cost. So I would really, suggest that you can incorporate that one. The next one is, most importantly, what I would suggest is you use importer time fixed effect, exporter time fixed effect, and pair fixed effects. It would be better to incorporate them in the model because, importer time fixed effect and exporter time fixed effects, they actually enable you to control for the unobservable multilateral resistance and potentially for any other observable and unobservable characteristics that may vary over time for each exporter and importer respectively. So there are a couple of benefits when we use the pair fixed effects in gravity model, like the pair fixed effect, actually it accounts for the endogeneity of the trade policy variables. And it also, like when you use it, it is a very flexible and comprehensive, and it accounts for the effects of all time varying bilateral trade costs. But one downfall of it is that when you use the pair fixed effect, you might not be able to use any time invariant variables like the, the distance and other. But that doesn't matter. Your main parameter is TBT and SPS. And so those variables actually time variant, so it should not be a problem. But again, you have also used the ad valorem tariff on the right-hand side. Again, there could be endogeneity bias in this case. If you do not actually incorporate like importer fixed effect, exporter time fixed effect, importer time fixed effect, and pair fixed effect. Now, what I would suggest you to, if you want to argue that is TBT SPS tariff does not suffer from reverse causality, you can just input a simple test for testing for potential reverse causality between trade and these variables. So I would suggest you can see, Itov and colleagues, their 2016 handbook. And there's one comment on your FGLS that you've used for the panel data. There are some limitations on the FGLS in the presence of serial correlation. So since you're using it for gravity model where you have consecutive years, so if you use the FGLS in these circumstances, that can be a problem. So I would suggest you do modified wall test to see if this is the case. Now regarding the paper on, let me move on to the second paper by Sugandha Huria. I apologize that I cannot comment much on your paper because I didn't have your paper and I got your presentation just before the session. So it is not possible for me to comment on your presentation based on the slides only. So, but I have just, one or two clarifications that I'd suggest, if you can give. Like the first one is that your assumption that on the production of technology, it seems very, very simplified. Like you assume that one final good is equals to one intermediate good. So you're assuming kind of one-to-one relationship. How reasonable is this assumption? And what if you change this assumption? Does the findings hold? Or how does the outcome actually change? Observation is on how did you define the size of the B and R, like in terms of population or the GDP or other variables, and you assume that the size is same. How reasonable is that as well? Like, how can be all the developing countries, the size would be almost similar in the size. But what is my concern is, won't FDI depend on the nature of the country? For example, the FDI in Botswana and FDI in India or Pakistan, they would not be the same. The FDI would very much depend on the country demand, stages of development, industrialization, and all that. So maybe a bit clarification on that front would be really helpful. Moving on to the third presenter, Dr. Amzad, I really enjoyed your presentation, and I think your econometrics seems very solid. But I have a couple of observations. Number one is, I assume you include language as the measure for the iceberg trade cost in your model. But I really suspect that the CLI measure that you have included in the model is highly endogenous. Like a structural gravity model when you use the pair fixed effect and country fixed effects, it actually corrects this issue, but not always. That is why it is often preferred to give a test whether there is any reverse quality remaining in the model. Why I think CLI is highly endogenous is because people might be learning Chinese to do more trade with China. If you take the CLI on the left-hand side and run the PPML, you might get a significant result. In such cases, you can go in reverse causality between trade and the CLI through the fixed effects. An easy test could be like implementing or assessing the strict exogeneity of the CLIs by adding a new variable capturing the future levels of the CLI. If like CLIs are exogenous to trade flows, the parameter associated with the variable of lead CLI should be statistically not different from 0. And in your paper, you have used a country pair fixed effect, and yet your result for time invariant variables like distance, contiguity, colony remain in the model. I'm not sure how actually it's possible, because usually it should wiped out when you have pair fixed effects. So when we use the pair fixed, it cannot actually identify the effects of any time invariant bilateral determinants of the trade flows, because of the latter will be absorbed by the pair fixed effects. But one major criticism that I have is that what is the policy relevance of this study? Like it is not a theoretical paper. In theoretical paper, you might not need any policy implication, but in empirical studies, policy relevance is often the main objective to carry out. So it is. It would be more. It would be better if you can give the policy relevance that can be taken from here. Like will learning more Chinese or acquiring more Chinese language will increase our trade with China? That's a really a question that I have. Only learning a language, will it actually foster more trade? So from what I'm interested from a policy perspective is the value of your RTA coefficient. And if you see, your RTA coefficient, this actually remains almost same whether you use CL as dummy or CLI as an index. So actually, what you have included CLI, it is working as one of your control variable for the iceberg trade cost.
Mahata, you have about 5 minutes to wrap up. Can you hear me, Mahata?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry to intervene. Just about 5 minutes to wrap up. Thank you. Bye.
I'll finish before then, sir. Before that. Regarding the last paper, paper from Osman Goni, in your paper, you have used a term. I'm not a lawyer, so my perspective would be completely different. And I can just, talk on a couple of suggestions on your paper that I thought you should incorporate. Like your paper looked very long and not focused. So it would be better to work on it, like make it more focused. What is the main objective of the paper? Just mention a couple of main objectives that you want to focus. And then give proper citations in the paper. In some places, you have made strong arguments, like MFN clauses decrease trade diversion and boost trade creation. Who proved this? Is it you that you're saying, or is it from some evidence, some studies? So you have to give citations or evidence who actually claim this argument or prove this one. And or some place you mentioned that the impact on small countries' state balance. So good citation and referencing would be a good idea. Your literature review look more like. I'd suggest you revamp your literature review following standard practice in academic journal. And the paper I got, there were no quantitative or qualitative analysis in that part, so I cannot actually make any comments on that. So let me conclude. So what I would suggest, if a very thank you to all the audience in Dhaka. I'm missing the conference in person. And a very good, well wishes to all the presents in the conference. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you.
Well, that was a commendable job done, having to comment on 4 papers. in the space of 15 minutes. It's a tall order. Once again, I do apologize to all the presenters for intervening and saying, you know, you've got certain time limit. I'm basically looking at the timekeeper and responding to that. And because in any case, we need to be able to stick to the time. More importantly, the papers dealt with a range of issues, and all having to do with trade, but approaching them in different ways. One was, as the author claims, purely theoretical. The others were quite empirical. And with empirical work and with theoretical work, as we've learned in economics, nobody has the last word. Not even the discussant will have the last word. So you can go back, and if you want to fine-tune it, you can do so. Now, I'm just wondering how best to do the rest of the session. I'm going to forego my privilege of saying lots of things about like a chair, but maybe it would be, I would love to hear from the audience. So you are most welcome to ask questions. And maybe the best way to do it is I'll direct it to the two authors here. And of course, the authors online can also respond virtually as well. So the floor is open for questions. There's one hand up. Would you be kind enough to introduce yourself and then pose the question, please? So it should be a question. If it's a question, say it's a question. If it's an observation, say it's an observation. Okay, thank you. And to whom?
Hello, this is Aship. I am a current postgraduate student of Department of Economics, Jagannath University, Dhaka. So my first question is to the first presenter, Ms. Shimran Khoshla. You have said, in your paper, you have said, due to market access barriers in agriculture sector amidst rising food insecurity. So my question is, does it lead to the market failure and promotes the rise of informal trade or illegal trade due to those barriers? Or even we know that in the Southeast, we have observed some informal trade that we might not have the data to us. So does it lead to them? And my another question to the second presenter. Regarding this, how can informal trade play a role in the welfare effects of a free trade agreement? Does it going to have a negative impact on prohibit the parties concerned to agree on the FTA? Thank you.
No, I will not allow cross-border. Okay, is the question clear, Simran? Do you want to respond, please? You can take mine. This one works for sure.
So your question was, does market access barriers lead to market failure, and does it lead to informal trade? I won't be able to talk about market failure because I think it's more of needs to be discussed from a general equilibrium perspective. It needs a lot more analysis than what we've looked at. However, I would like to say that due to these measures, when importers put non-tariff measures, in our analysis, we've looked at exports from free-on-board perspective. So, for example, an exporter like India, if it is sending a consignment to, suppose, European Union, and due to a measure, a non-tariff measure, that consignment gets rejected. The exporter, depending upon the importer, most of the time they burn it off or they don't return the consignment. However, most of the time they return it and then the exporter can reroute it to other countries. So that is not getting captured through our FOB data, and I think it leads to some sort of trade gets not distorted, but goes to other countries. So it's not exactly informal trade, but trade tends to get diverted. Yeah. So I think that's the best I can answer your question.
Any more questions or comments from anybody here on any of the papers? What does silence mean? It means that you're prepared to go for the tea break, or any more comments or questions, anybody? Okay. This is what I'm going to do then. I'm going to actually ask the online presenters to say a few more words of clarification in response to the discussant. And Simran, I'll also invite you, and Osman, I'll invite you as well. So can we give the opportunity to the online presenters to say a few words about the kind of comments that they have received from the discussant? We'll start with Sugandha, maybe Huria.
Hi, sir. Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, you're very audible, yes.
So I would like to first respond to the question raised by someone in the audience. So he was asking me that whether informal trade or rising informal trade could actually, impede the very purpose of signing an FTA or could affect the welfare effects of FTA. Of course, it can, because any which ways, if you take a look at the FTA utilization rate, it is not very great. So with reference to many developing and emerging market economies, it's not more than 15 to 20%. It's around 10% in the context of the Indian economy. And this is because the awareness is pretty less, because in the context of India as well, most of the firms are actually micro, small or medium enterprises. So they belong to the so-called MSME sector, and they're not very much aware of the norms that, guide the FTA rooted trade. And secondly, what has happened is that over the years, the stringency of the rules of origin, preferential rules of origin, has also increased, which in turn again impedes the very purpose of, taking the FTA route vis-a-vis the MFN route. And any which ways, if the average MFN tariff rate is going down drastically, and, many of the non-tariff measures or other provisions are not included substantially within a free trade agreement, then countries, or I should say rather firms, are not pretty much interested in taking the FTA route vis-a-vis the no FTA or the MFN route altogether. So if it is about informal trade, and informal trade is increasing just because they want to jump, the restrictions, the regulatory restrictions that affect their trade with the partner economy, specifically the countries with which they share some common border, etc., then of course that could indirectly affect the FTA rooted trade as well. This is what I think, if that answers your
I'm just
question.
wondering whether you would like to say a few words about the observations by our discussant on the technical aspects of your paper. Just in a minute or so, please. Thank you. You want to say something?
Yeah, thank you. So, right, yes. So basically, sir, thank you so much for your comments. And I would just like to say, so the framework that I borrowed it from a very famous paper by Bander and Spencer. So it was a paper in 1973, which actually, sort of marks the beginning of incorporating intra-industry trade. But that paper solely talks about intra-industry trade in the context of final goods and doesn't incorporate the possibility of intermediate inputs. And it has nothing to do with, FTA altogether as well. And there are certain revisions of that paper by Krugman and others wherein they try to incorporate more complicated frameworks. Now the issue is, the main question was the impact of incorporating investment provisions within free trade agreements. Now the if I would have taken a more complicated GVC kind of structure, I would not have been able to solve the entire model framework. So this is why I took certain simplified assumptions. So with respect to technology, I took this assumption that let's assume that only one unit of final input is employed in the unit of final goods. So in a way, I'm also introducing the possibility of rigid technologies, which is not a realistic assumption, but we can always violate that assumption and figure out that, okay, how do we see our results, getting deviated? It is like, in other words, I would say I'm trying to control for any change in technologies. Like when we set up a regression framework, we do not just have the main explanatory variable, we have a whole lot of controls, right? And then we look at the partial effect of the main explanatory variable on the recurrence. So this is what I'm trying to do by simplifying that. And as regards your comment on the market size effect, so that market size effect is the consuming cohort, because the way I incorporate the demand function, so that's come from a quasi-linear utility function. We derive the linear demand function from a quasi-linear utility function. And again there the intercept represents the market size in terms of the consumption requirement of that particular economy under consideration. Now, why did we assume countries B and R to be of similar sizes? Because the number of parameters otherwise were so high that I was unable to find out, any feasible solution and intuitively interpret it. So in order to give some intuitive basis to the model setup, I had to specifically assume that, there is this one country which we could manage to give a different market size altogether, and the other two countries under consideration which belong to the similar, sort of setup, which do not have access to a local multinational firm, because we are trying to distinguish between somehow distinguish between country A, which owns the multinational firm, vis-a-vis countries B and R. We assume that B and R are from the same, they have the same size. So in a way, we control for the differences in their size effect as well, while commenting upon the FTA contagion effect. So in my study, what I've also done is, because in the context of free trade agreements without any reference to foreign direct investment related provisions, Professor Richard Baldwin has talked a lot about contagion effects, where he said that, when countries, two or more than two partner economies, they start negotiating trade agreements with each other, that also incentivizes the other economies which are pretty much linked to these two countries under consideration to also negotiate trade agreements. So now we were also trying to comment upon whether, there is some sort of investment contagion effect as well that we see in the context of our framework. And in order to comment upon that, we said that let's control for the differences in market sizes.
Okay.
When it comes to comparing the welfare effects of country B, which is receiving FDI from country A and also signing an FTA with country A, vis-a-vis country R, which represents sort of the rest of the world, and it is not receiving FDI from country A, but still is able to continue its trade with country A, even though country A and B are now, also considered as FTA partners altogether.
Okay.
And your third comment upon whether, sorry.
No, I'm just wondering whether you just want to wrap so that I can give an opportunity to the other speakers to respond as well. So, do you have any? Are you happy with the comments from the discussant? Do you think there is scope for sort of fine-tuning your paper? That's what's most important.
Yeah, I'll definitely do that. I'll definitely include the read.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, Dr. Amjad Masood, if you're online, you're most welcome to respond.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Mahtab, for the nice discussion and for the comments. I just quickly want to respond to that. Very first one is about the policy relevance of the paper. I mean, the relevance is pretty much obvious, because for any government, Chinese government or any other government, when they are kind of putting efforts to spread their, language and culture and all these things, this is not just a literary or cultural events. It has a lot to do with economy, and as a part of the economy, the trade section, what is discussed in this paper, like it would really boost bilateral trade. And there were other two parts. One was about this bilateral fixed effect, country pair fixed effect. That was a typo, I think, in the draft. I actually wanted to estimate the equation using country pair fixed effect and alternatively excluding the country pair fixed effect while using, the distance and contiguity and colony and all these traditional variables. And of course, I understand that you cannot, simultaneously do the same. Lastly, of course, you mentioned something about simultaneity and the reverse causality between trade and language. I think in almost every model we deal in economics, there are these type of issues, and I understand trade boosts language and language boosts trade. There has to be some refinement for that issue. Thank you very much for pointing out. But from my understanding, I think a little bit more important perhaps is the current draft of the paper is a little bit too dramatic. I don't know how to control that, but somehow when we are kind of trying to explain real world situations in general equilibrium model, then we cannot include all different aspects of the real life, so it becomes like that.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that, Dr. Masood. Now, Mr. Ghani, Usman Ghani Tuhin, you've been responding to the discussant who felt that your paper needed more focus. Would you want to say something about that?
Well, thank you, Mr. Discussant, for your valuable opinion. But I would like to say that maybe he have received our first draft, not the final paper, because we have actually overcome most of the issues, but we had some issues. That's what I'm also agree with him, but not that much. We have added more references in our final paper. And about the object issues, he have said, we had actually two major objects. One is to how by developing policies we can actually stop the threatening issues of the developed country to the most favored nations. And number second is how actually we can develop the dispute settlement mechanism between the South Asian countries so that we don't have to go to the other countries for our dispute settlements like China or Singapore or Dubai. Or we are actually saying that most of the forwarded to the Singapore International Arbitration Center or the Chinese Arbitration Center. So those two objects actually were taken in consideration while we actually studied those papers.
Thank you very much for your comments. I want to go back to Simran because I wonder whether you want to respond to some of the technical aspects of your paper that we discussed and identified. Would you like to say something?
Sure. If I have time, I'll definitely try to answer as many queries as raised. But
take a few minutes.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. First of all, I think they were really helpful, and it will definitely help us to refine our paper. The first query was regarding the selection criteria for our exporters and importers. So to set the context, in the existing literature, most of the studies have talked about how exporters from low-income countries or non-developed economies tend to face non-tariff measures. These measures act like barriers to trade. So we wanted to look at low middle-income countries because a lot of literature has already been done on low-income countries. And the reason for choosing high-income countries as importers was that these countries are the major users of non-tariff measures. These are the markets where exporters are trying to access, and they tend to face a lot of difficulty. So this was one of the criteria that we used to shortlist 10 exporters and 10 importers. Also, data availability was another criteria because of which we restricted our analysis to just 10 countries at the moment. However, it's definitely work in progress, and we do plan to expand our analysis to more countries. Similarly, for products, these were the top 20 most traded products. We wanted to keep our analysis not very small, but manageable level. So we just selected 20 products for the analysis. However, again, we'll try to incorporate, I think at 4-digit level, there are 224 products which are classified as agriculture products. So we'll try to definitely take the analysis over all of those agriculture products. Regarding MRI, as pointed in Anderson and Wincoop, who introduced this concept, we are sorry that we were not able to mention the formula. We missed it. We've used weighted average of log of distance. So we've taken distance as a variable, and it is weighted by GDPs. And I do accept that there could be endogeneity problem, and we've tried to fix it by using fixed effects. However, I definitely agree that using pair fixed effects would be a better method to correct for it, and going forward we'll try to improve our methodology. As far as
there was, you pointed out about R square, the value was low. We've compared our the R square with the similar studies that have been done in the literature, and we found that it was somewhere, all of them had similar level of R square. So that's why we went ahead with this. And as far as TBT was concerned and why there was a positive sign of TBT, we need to look at how SPS, these are more stringent. They are introduced, they're based on scientific justifications, whereas TBT on the other hand, they relate to labeling and packaging of products. So there is discussion that these are not as stringent as SPS, and exporters might have gained experience over the years and are able to overcome these measures. So this could be one reason that we have a positive sign of TBT. And another reason is that, as I pointed out, that we've looked at exports from free on board terms. So even if these products got rejected, they could have got it rerouted to other markets, which our data was not able to capture. So that could be one possibility.
Okay, thank you for this comprehensive response. Well, we are coming to the end of the session. I believe that there's some kind of certificate. Okay, so one of the pleasures of being a chair is that I get to distribute paper certificates, which I'll do so. Okay, first to Simran, thank you very much. A round of applause, please. And then to Mr. Osman Ghani, to win a round of applause, please. Okay. All three of us for this. So this Sanem knows what to do. Huh? It's always called real marketing stuff. Now I'll take this microphone away. All right. I think you should come in. Okay, there you go. Is this going to be a photo shoot or just one? Done? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you again. Thank you, sir. Okay, so this brings us to the conclusion of the session. But before we proceed to tea, I would like to make a correction, if I may, and I offer my apologies to the name of one co-author who was missed out. This is Professor Murali Kallumal. Is that correct? Yeah, so he's the first author. I'm sorry I missed his name out. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the speakers for their wonderful presentations, for the thought and the effort that has gone into it. And I'd like to thank the audience for your patient hearing, and at least one question came out of that, and that's very nice. One thing I've learned is that dealing with technology is always tricky, isn't it? So presenting a session in hybrid mode is the worst nightmare for a chair, that I can tell you, because you don't know when it will sort of go offline or get disrupted. So thank you very much, and enjoy your tea break. Thank you.